It started with a sound, barely a whisper, like wood creaking under the weight of footsteps that weren't there. For most people, it would have been easy to brush off. A draft, maybe. Old houses settle all the time, don't they? But for Emily, standing alone in the dim hallway of the strange mansion, that sound felt personal. As if the house itself had noticed her, and was deciding what to do next. Long before she ever set foot inside the Winchester Mystery House, Emily had been fascinated by the bizarre. A documentary filmmaker by trade, she hunted stories buried under decades of dust and silence. Forgotten hotels, abandoned asylums, old town legends, those were her usual haunts. But something about this particular house tugged at her curiosity like no other. Not just because of its strange architecture, or the woman behind its creation, but because of the stories, whispers of spirits, endless construction, and rooms that had no reason to exist. It was a cold, overcast morning when Emily first arrived in San Jose, California. The skies hung heavy, casting everything in a pale gray light that made the shadows seem deeper, darker. She parked her car outside the estate's ornate gates, her breath fogging the windshield. The house stood tall and sprawling in the distance, its steep gables and sharp angles cutting into the horizon like jagged teeth. From afar, it looked like any other Victorian mansion, weathered, beautiful, but unassuming. Up close, however, the truth revealed itself. As she walked closer, her footsteps echoing across the gravel, she noticed the windows, some leading to brick walls, others facing solid floors. Stairs that rose and ended at ceilings. Doors on the second story that opened to nothing but air. The house seemed confused, almost like it had built itself without knowing where anything should go. The local guide she'd spoken to the day before had tried to warn her. "It's not just the construction," he'd said, eyes low, voice hushed. "It's the feeling inside. Like you're being watched. Like someone, or something, is always just a few steps behind you." People say Sarah built the house to trap spirits. But what if the house is a spirit? Emily wasn't one to believe ghost stories so easily. She preferred facts, evidence, footage. But now, standing at the threshold, her hand hovering over the doorknob, she felt it too, that strange pressure in her chest, like the air was too thick. Like the walls were waiting. She entered with a slow, cautious step. The door creaked shut behind her, and immediately, the sounds of the outside world vanished. Silence swallowed the space like a vacuum. The air was colder than it should have been. Dust floated in the shafts of light filtering through stained glass windows, and every board beneath her feet groaned like it remembered every person who had ever walked its halls. She began filming right away, her camera panning across the narrow hallways and crooked staircases. There were mirrors facing other mirrors, corners where none should exist, and an almost maddening repetition of doors, doors that opened to nothing, doors that refused to open at all. The design was confusing, deliberate in its disorientation. Sarah Winchester, the widow of the gun magnate, had built this house without stopping for nearly 4 decades. Some said it was guilt that drove her, believing the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles were haunting her. Others claimed she was following the instructions of a medium, who told her that constant construction was the only way to keep the spirits at bay. Whatever the reason, the house grew endlessly, room by room, stair by stair, into a maze without logic. But why were there rooms sealed off entirely? Why were some hallways bricked over, hidden from plain view? Emily couldn't shake the sense that the house wasn't just big, it was alive, and it was trying to hide something. In one particularly narrow corridor, her flashlight flickered. The beam bounced off a dusty painting on the wall, its image faded, the subject unrecognizable. She took a step forward, and then another. Behind her, a soft knock. She spun around, camera raised, but the hallway was empty. No wind. No draft. Just the sound, 3 knocks, deliberate, slow. Knock. 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 She held her breath. Nothing. She continued deeper, finding herself in a part of the house that wasn't on any tour map. The wood here was darker, the walls tighter, almost suffocating. It smelled of old varnish and mildew. A single window, boarded shut from the inside, let in no light. She passed a door with a rusted knob and paused. Her gut twisted. This door wasn't like the others. It had symbols carved into it, barely visible, worn by time. Circles. Lines. Something that looked like an eye. Her hand hovered again, hesitant. The air felt electric. The silence turned sharp. And then, a breath. Not hers. She turned the handle. It didn't budge. The camera in her hand buzzed with static for a second, glitching. She looked at the screen, it had gone black. When it flickered back on, she gasped. The hallway behind her wasn't behind her anymore. The door she had come through was gone. And in its place stood another. A door with no hinges. A door with no frame. A door that shouldn't even exist. She backed away, heart pounding, searching for any clue as to how the corridor had changed. She hadn't moved far. She couldn't have. Yet everything had shifted. The wallpaper was different. The floor slanted. And from the corner of her eye, she saw movement, something behind the walls. A shadow, long, too long. It passed by, unseen but sensed. She wasn't alone. And then she heard it again, those 3 knocks. But this time, they came from inside the wall. She froze, unsure whether to run or stay perfectly still. The camera began recording on its own. And behind her, a door creaked open slowly, one she hadn't seen before. A cold breath curled around her neck. And something whispered her name. Emily turned, Toby continued, "Would you like the continuation to follow a psychological horror style or something more paranormal and action-driven?" Emily turned, slowly, cautiously, every part of her body tense like a coiled spring. Her camera shook slightly in her hand, the lens catching only flickers of what was around her, peeling wallpaper, warped floorboards, a shifting darkness that didn't seem to obey the rules of the light. The door behind her, the one that had opened on its own, now stood wide like a gaping mouth. Inside, only blackness. No walls, no furniture. Just shadow. And silence. She took a hesitant step forward, compelled by a strange mix of fear and fascination. The air seemed thicker in this part of the house. It clung to her skin, heavy and damp, like breathing through soaked cloth. Her flashlight dimmed again, its beam narrowing until it barely pierced a few feet in front of her. The batteries were new. She'd checked them that morning. Another knock, this time softer, farther away, as if coming from deep within the walls. Then another. And another. They didn't follow a rhythm, but they weren't random either. It was as though someone, or something, was moving through the house with her, pacing, waiting. She spoke into the camera, her voice low and shaky, almost afraid to be heard. "It's hard to describe. It's like the house is different now. The hallway behind me disappeared. There's this door that wasn't here before. It opened on its own. I think I'm in a part of the house that's not on any blueprint." No response, of course. She was alone. Or at least, she hoped she was. Emily stepped into the black room. The air dropped another 10 degrees. She could see her breath now. The floor creaked beneath her boots, but it felt different, hollow, like she was walking over something not quite solid. The light finally caught the far wall. She almost dropped the camera. It wasn't a wall at all. It was a mirror. A giant, floor-to-ceiling mirror that reflected nothing but darkness. Not her, not the room, nothing. Her reflection was missing. She stepped closer, raising her hand, reaching out, though every instinct screamed not to. The glass was smooth, ice-cold. But the second her fingers made contact, a soft thud echoed from the other side. She yanked her hand back. Then it came again. A soft knock. Thud. Thud. From inside the mirror. She turned away, heart hammering, and nearly ran into a narrow stairwell that hadn't been there seconds before. It curled sharply downward, lit only by a single hanging bulb that flickered as if unsure it wanted to stay lit at all. Emily didn't want to descend, but she also couldn't go back. The door was gone again, sealed behind a wall of rotting wood. The house was shifting. With a deep breath, she stepped onto the stairs. Each step groaned under her weight, threatening to collapse. The air grew thicker still, now laced with the smell of old smoke and something else, iron, maybe. Or blood. She tried not to think about it. As she reached the bottom, she found herself in what looked like an unfinished cellar. Bricks lined the walls, but many were missing or broken. A few old chairs, a rusted sink, and something that looked like a child's rocking horse sat forgotten in the corners, coated in years of grime. That's when she saw the writing. Scratched into the brick in shaky, desperate strokes were words, dozens of them, layered over each other. Some in English. Others in languages she didn't recognize. But one message stood out, over and over again, asterisk, don't follow the whispering. Asterisk, and now, of course, she could hear it. Faint, at first. Barely audible. Like a breeze through a crack in the window. But it grew louder the longer she stood there. Voices, maybe 3 or 4, speaking in low, breathy tones, too fast to understand, too soft to follow. They circled her. One behind the sink. Another near the stairs. One directly in the wall. Emily raised her camera, aiming it toward the source. Nothing on the screen. Just static. But the whispers persisted, now inching toward her ears. Not just near her, but inside them, as if they were threading into her skull. She ran, back up the stairs, into the hallway that had changed again. No longer was it narrow and cold. It was now wide, warmly lit by old chandeliers. Dust motes danced in the air like lazy snowflakes. Classical music played softly in the distance, distorted, as if from an old phonograph record spinning just a little too slowly. It didn't make her feel safe. It felt wrong. Like the house was pretending. Like it was showing her a version of itself that wasn't real. She called out, hoping for another human voice. Nothing answered. The chandeliers began to swing, ever so slightly. The music scratched mid-note and started again. A loop. Over and over. The same haunting tune. She passed a room that looked untouched by time. A velvet couch, untouched tea set, embroidered pillows. But the tea was still warm. Steam curled above the cups. Someone had just been there. Or still was. On the table, she noticed something chilling, a photograph. Black and white. Old, probably from the early 1900s. In it stood a woman in mourning clothes, her face pale, almost blurred. Behind her was the house. The same hallway. The same chandelier. But the figure in the window behind her didn't belong. It was tall, its shape all wrong. Distorted, like something half seen in a nightmare. No face. Just the suggestion of one. The whispering came again. This time, a word. Her name. Emily. She dropped the photo and backed away, breathing hard. She wanted out. Now. But the hallway twisted again, literally turned, like a corridor folding in on itself. The floor beneath her tilted. Lights burst overhead, sending shards of glass raining down. She shielded her face and ran blindly, back into the dark. She didn't know where she was going anymore. The camera glitched again, showing only flickers of what it was recording, a staircase that ended mid-air, a room full of clocks that all ticked in reverse, a mirror that showed her, but smiling when she wasn't. Each step forward seemed to take her somewhere else, as if the house were shifting around her, changing with every breath. There were no rules anymore. And that was the moment she realized the truth. This house wasn't just built to confuse spirits. It was built to trap something inside. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't empty anymore. Would you like the next part to push deeper into psychological horror, or would you prefer Emily to start finding clues and unraveling the house's secrets? Emily stumbled into another room, panting, disoriented, the edges of her vision blurring. Her chest burned from the cold air and the sheer panic gripping her lungs. Every direction looked the same, hallways that didn't lead anywhere, staircases that bent at impossible angles, doors that vanished as soon as she passed through them. The Winchester house was no longer a home or even a place. It had become something alive, shifting like it breathed, responding to her fear like it fed on it. She leaned against a wall, trying to catch her breath. The wood beneath her palms pulsed, just once, faint but undeniable. Like a heartbeat. The camera in her hand flickered again, its screen showing grainy footage even though it was recording in high definition. And then, just for a second, the screen showed something behind her. A figure. Not clear, shadowy, hunched, and wrong. She spun around. Nothing was there. Emily backed away slowly, heart racing. She whispered to herself, trying to calm down. It's just in your head. You're tired. You're not sleeping well. There's no one here. But she didn't believe it. Not anymore. That's when she heard it, the sound of footsteps above her. Heavy, dragging. They moved slowly, as if pacing. Then came a second set, lighter, quicker. And then both stopped. She didn't know why, but she felt certain, whoever, or whatever, was up there, knew she was listening. A soft thud echoed behind her. She turned and found herself facing a new door. This one had no handle. Just a keyhole. Carved into the wood were more symbols, arcs, spirals, crude sketches of eyes. The keyhole was dark, but she felt an overwhelming urge to look through it. She crouched, brought her eye to the hole, and peered inside. Blackness. Nothing. Then, movement. She saw an eye. It was already looking at her. She jerked back, falling onto the floor, the camera landing beside her with a clatter. The door remained still. Silent. Unmoving. But something had definitely been on the other side. She grabbed the camera and stood. Her legs felt weak, her thoughts scrambled. She needed to get out. She had to find the front door, or any door that led outside. But each time she turned a corner, she found only more of the same, endless halls, looping corridors, rooms that reset themselves. One room even showed her the exact same footage she had just recorded, playing on a vintage television set that hadn't been plugged in. And the whispers, they were constant now. Not voices anymore. Just noise. A soft, buzzing static that filled her ears and made her teeth ache. She opened a door at random and found a child's bedroom, dusty, untouched. The wallpaper was faded with time, but she could still see the faint outlines of bunnies and stars. A small rocking chair sat in the corner, facing the wall. She stepped in cautiously, panning her camera across the room. The chair moved. Just a little. Back and forth. Back and forth. She approached it slowly. Her hand reached out toward it, and the wall in front of the chair breathed. Not metaphorically. It rose and fell, like a chest taking in air. The wallpaper stretched slightly, cracking at the edges as if it could barely contain what was beneath it. And just as quickly, it stopped. Dead still. Emily backed out of the room, the chair still rocking, faster now. As she turned to close the door, she caught a glimpse of something reflected in the hallway mirror, a child, standing just beyond the chair. Watching her. But when she looked back into the room, it was empty. She was shaking now. The cold had gone beyond physical, it was in her bones. Every part of her screamed to leave, to run, but there was no direction to flee. The house was closing in. The air itself felt heavier, harder to move through. And then, she heard something new. A voice. Not a whisper. Not a murmur. A man's voice, loud, desperate, echoing faintly through the vents. She won't stop. You have to help me. Please, oh God, she's watching again, the voice cut off in a sharp, horrible silence. Emily froze, the blood draining from her face. She ran toward the direction of the voice, down a spiraling staircase that hadn't been there seconds ago. It led to a narrow hallway lined with doors, each one slightly open, just enough to tempt her. One door stood out. It was newer than the others. Not Victorian like the rest of the house, but plain, modern, like it didn't belong here. It had a light under it, flickering, fluorescent. She pushed it open. Inside was a small, windowless room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with dozens of VHS tapes, each labeled with names. Some were smudged, hard to read. But a few stood out. One said Emily Walker, entry begins. Her stomach turned. She didn't remember giving anyone her full name. She picked up the tape with shaking hands, her breath catching in her throat. Before she could process it, the old TV in the corner turned on by itself. Static at first, then video. It was her. Filming. From inside the house. The footage she had just recorded, except it kept going. It showed her entering a room she hadn't been in yet. A room with a chair in the center and mirrors on all sides. The timestamp was for 10 minutes in the future. And in the reflection behind her, the figure. Closer now. Visible. Tall. Hollow-eyed. Wearing something tattered, covered in dust and soot. Its head was tilted, as if curious. The footage ended with the lights flickering, and her screaming. The screen went black. Behind her, the television whispered her name. Emily ran. She didn't know where to go. Every hallway had become part of a dream logic maze, familiar and wrong all at once. The same doors, the same mirrors, over and over again. Her feet ached. Her breathing turned shallow. The whispers in the walls grew louder. She could swear one of them was laughing. But the worst part wasn't the house anymore. It was the realization that someone else had been here. Others, before her. Trapped. And none of them had made it out. Would you like the next part to start revealing the house's origins through clues or keep Emily in survival mode with mounting psychological dread? Emily could barely feel her legs anymore. The fear had sunk so deep into her body that everything had gone numb, like she was moving through syrup, her mind splitting from her actions. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was surviving. The house groaned and pulsed with every breath she took, the walls seeming to stretch and twitch, responding to her fear like a predator savoring the moment before it pounced. She ran down another hallway. How many had there been now, lined with picture frames? At first, they showed nothing but age-worn portraits of strangers, faded ink and dust-covered glass. But as she passed each one, she began to recognize the faces. The librarian from her hometown. Her college roommate. Her mother. Her own reflection, staring back at her with dead eyes, the expression wrong, the mouth stretched too wide. She looked away, but one frame cracked loudly as she passed. A jagged fracture ran across her reflection's face. And then the frame fell. Shattered glass sprayed at her feet. The photo inside now blackened, as if burned from within. Smoke rose faintly off the paper. She backed away, only for the lights overhead to blow out one by one, plunging the corridor into darkness. She turned on her flashlight. It flickered twice, then died. The house was completely still. And then, *Creek star. Footsteps. Not hers. Slow, deliberate, impossibly heavy, as if something massive were shifting through the walls themselves. Closer. Closer. Emily held her breath, backing into a doorway behind her and slowly, carefully shutting it. She didn't even realize she was shaking until she had to brace herself against the wall to stop her knees from giving out. The room was empty, except for a single candle burning on the floor. It hadn't been lit a second ago. The flame danced unnaturally, casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. One shadow stretched up higher than it should have, too tall, too distorted, like a puppet with broken strings. She turned to look behind her. Nothing there. But the shadow remained. Then the candle went out. Emily felt something brush the side of her face, light as a whisper. Cold. She choked back a cry and lunged for the door, twisting the knob. It wouldn't budge. She yanked harder. Still nothing. Behind her, she heard a deep, crackling breath. Slow, rasping. Then the unmistakable sound of fingernails scraping across wood. Not scratching. Writing. She turned slowly, heart hammering so loudly in her ears she thought she might pass out. On the opposite wall, letters were appearing, carved into the surface with invisible hands. You're already part of it, her voice finally returned, hoarse and broken. Part of what? The room trembled. A light flared from under the door, bright, blinding. The knob turned on its own and the door creaked open slowly, revealing another hallway, but this one was unlike the others. It was glowing, not warmly, but with a sterile, white light that hurt to look at. The walls pulsed like veins. The floor was slick and uneven. Emily stepped through. She had no choice. The hallway narrowed as she moved forward, almost squeezing her body until her shoulders brushed both sides. Every few steps, she passed more mirrors, but now they were smeared with handprints, on the inside. She tried not to look. The whispers were louder now. Not words anymore, but desperate weeping, frantic breathing, things too quiet to be fully heard but too loud to ignore. The hallway ended in a room she instinctively knew had no exits. The walls were smooth. No windows. The only thing inside was a single antique writing desk with a mirror above it. On the desk, a notebook lay open, a fountain pen resting beside it. The pages were covered in her handwriting. But she hadn't written any of it. She stepped closer, squinting at the words. It was a journal entry. Her own voice, her own thoughts, but describing moments she hadn't lived yet. Future entries. Pages upon pages detailing what she would do next, what she would see, what she would feel. And on the very last page, the writing stopped mid-sentence. I turn around and I see, she dropped the notebook. A guttural moan filled the room, long and low like something ancient waking up from a deep sleep. She turned to the mirror, dreading what she would see, but the surface was no longer reflective. It was like water now. Dark, rippling. She stepped back, and something pressed against the other side of the mirror from within. A hand. Long fingers. thin skin stretched too tight over the bones. The surface of the mirror bulged slightly outward as if the thing inside were trying to push through. Then it stopped. A voice, not hers, came from the notebook. Not spoken aloud, but inside her head. She kept building because she thought it would confuse the spirits. But some doors should never be opened. Emily backed toward the wall, trembling. Who are you? You opened too many. And with that, the mirror cracked, once, then again. Lines of fracture spread across it like spiderwebs. Something behind it was moving. She didn't wait to see what it was. She ran. The door she'd entered through had disappeared again, but a trapdoor on the floor had opened in its place. She dropped into the dark without thinking. She landed hard on a floor of soft dirt. A basement? A tunnel? She couldn't tell. The air was humid, and the walls were lined with rotting wood beams. Along one side, lanterns glowed faintly, but there were more of those names carved into the support beams. Names of people. Many scratched out. She turned a corner and found something she hadn't expected, another person. Or at least, it had been a person once. Sitting against the wall was a man in tattered clothes, eyes open wide, unmoving. His face frozen in terror. His skin gray, as if he'd been drained of life long ago. Clutched in his hand was a small recorder. She knelt beside him and pressed play. The voice crackled through the speaker, shaking, desperate. If you're hearing this, don't trust the mirrors. Don't believe the rooms. They make you see things. They learn you. They copy you. This house, it doesn't want visitors. It wants stories. It wants memories. And once it has enough, static. Then silence. Emily dropped the recorder, backing away from the corpse. A light flickered to life in the tunnel ahead. And then she heard it. Not footsteps. Not whispers. But her own voice. Laughing. She turned around. There, standing just beyond the edge of the light, was herself. Smiling. Head tilted. Eyes wide. But it wasn't her. Something about the shape was wrong. The mouth stretched too far. The eyes were too empty. And she didn't blink. The doppelganger took a step forward. Emily ran. She didn't know what direction she was going anymore, just deeper, always deeper. The tunnels changed behind her. The light receded. Her double followed, footsteps now echoing in sync with her own, mockingly identical. She screamed into the dark. What do you want from me? But the house didn't answer. It didn't need to. It was already telling her everything, in her own voice. Would you like the climax in the next prompt to involve an escape attempt, or a terrifying confrontation with the entity haunting the house? Emily ran until her lungs screamed and her legs felt like they would snap under her. The tunnels blurred into a nightmare smear of dirt and flickering light. Behind her, the imitation of herself, that thing, followed without sound now. It didn't need to chase her. It knew the house better than she ever could. It had time. She didn't. She burst into a large open chamber, her boots skidding on the uneven ground. For a moment, the silence was total. No footsteps. No whispers. Just her rapid breathing and the deep throb of her own heartbeat. Then her flashlight flickered back to life on its own, its beam landing on the far wall, and revealing something that made her forget how to breathe. It was a mural. Painted in blood and soot. Dozens of faces etched into the surface, some howling in agony, some silent in horror. And every single one of them looked like her. Older versions. Younger. Dressed differently. But her. Emily stumbled backward, her heel catching on something. She fell hard, her hand scraping across cold stone. She looked down, and saw bones. Human. Piled neatly, deliberately, forming the shape of a spiral. In the center sat a small wooden box. She should have run. She knew it. But something about that box pulled her. She reached out and lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of personal items. A cracked photograph of her as a child. A keychain from her old school. A lock of her own hair. She gasped and dropped it. The box wasn't old. It had been made recently. It had been made for her. A voice echoed in the chamber, low and brittle, like old paper tearing. You were never the first. She whipped around, and for the first time, saw something truly impossible. In the shadows stood at least half a dozen versions of herself. Not the twisted double from before, but real, breathing versions. Some looked exhausted, others wounded. One was crying. Another held a rusted knife in her shaking hands. They didn't speak. They just watched her, like they were waiting for her to understand. Emily backed against the wall, panic rising like bile in her throat. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a cycle. A trap. The house recreated her. Over and over. Or maybe it pulled versions of her from somewhere else, time, reality, it didn't matter anymore. It had studied her long before she ever arrived. Lured her here like it had done with them. All of them. Each version walked the halls, believing she was the only one. She remembered the journal from earlier, the pages predicting what she would do. That hadn't been prophecy. It was memory. The house was writing her story before she lived it. Suddenly, the air grew sharp, metallic. The chamber began to rumble. The lights dimmed and surged. The versions of herself started to scream, one by one, their bodies convulsing as they flickered like broken TV signals. Their faces twisted in pain, merging and separating again. The wall behind them split open with a loud crack, revealing a staircase spiraling downward, carved into stone that oozed like wet clay. She had no choice. She ran down the stairs, every instinct screaming at her to stop. The steps seemed endless, but when she finally reached the bottom, she emerged into a massive underground room, far older than anything she'd seen before. Stone pillars. Ritual markings. And at the center, an altar. It pulsed with light, humming, alive. But what stopped her cold was what lay beside it. A mirror. Not cracked. Not warped. Just normal. Except she couldn't see her reflection in it. Instead, she saw herself, standing in the exact same spot, but from above, like the camera was high on the ceiling. Like she was watching a recording of herself in real time. A camera feed. Then the screen flickered. And she saw another person walk into frame. It wasn't her double this time. It was a man. Late 40s, graying beard, holding a clipboard. He looked around the room, not like someone who was trapped, but like someone who belonged there. Emily's mouth went dry. She remembered the voice from the tape recorder. It wants stories, it wants memories. This wasn't just a supernatural haunting. Someone, something, was using this place. Recording people. Studying their fear. Or worse, feeding off it. She screamed at the mirror, pounding her fists against it. Who are you? Why me? The man on the screen paused, looking straight at her, no, straight at the camera. As if he knew she'd see this. And then he smiled. Calm. Cold. He mouthed two words, asterisk your turn. Asterisk behind her, something growled. She turned slowly. The double was there again. closer than ever. Its face wasn't her own anymore. Not exactly. It shifted, melting, bubbling, warping into the faces from the mural. All of them. Overlapping. Crying. Laughing. Begging. One soul for every scream the house had ever trapped. Emily ran for the altar. She didn't know what she was doing anymore, just that this felt like the center. The heart. If she was going to fight, it had to be here. She grabbed the edge of the stone, the symbols lighting up beneath her fingers, burning her palms. The house roared in pain, or maybe rage. The mirrors in the chamber cracked one by one, shrieking like they were alive. The floor shook. The walls bled. And the last thing she heard was her own voice saying, "Now you know how it ends." Then everything went black. So what do you think is happening inside the Winchester house? What would you do if you were in Emily's place? Do you think she's still alive in there, or is that just one version of her left behind? Let me know in the comments. And remember, some houses aren't built to keep things out. They're built to keep things in. Emily awoke to silence. For a moment, she thought it was over. The pain in her head pulsed like a second heartbeat, and the sting on her palms still burned from where she had touched the altar. But the room had changed. No more screaming walls. No doppelgangers. No flickering lights. It was still and cold, like the breath had been sucked out of the world. She sat up slowly, her vision swimming. The altar was gone. So were the mirrors. Now, she was in a long, plain hallway, modern, sterile, lit by fluorescent panels above. There was a hum in the air. Low, electrical. Familiar. This place wasn't supernatural. It was manufactured. She stood, legs trembling, and moved forward. At the end of the hallway was a metal door. On it was a keypad. When she approached, the lights above flickered once, and the keypad beeped. Then, the door opened on its own. The room inside was blinding white, like a lab. Smooth walls, smooth floors, lined with black monitors. Rows and rows of screens, each showing a different hallway of the Winchester house. Some showed staircases to nowhere. Others, doors opening into brick walls. A few displayed people, others. Lost. Wandering. Crying. Whispering for help. One woman was curled into a ball on the floor, rocking back and forth. And there, in the center of the room, stood the man from the mirror. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "Emily," he said, almost warmly. "You weren't supposed to make it this far." She wanted to scream. To grab something and hit him. But her body locked in place, frozen by disbelief. "What is this?" she whispered. "What are you?" He tilted his head, like a teacher with a slow student. "You think this house was just haunted? Cursed by some angry widow's grief?" He smiled. "It was never about ghosts. It was always about patterns. Fear. Behavior under pressure. The perfect maze. The Winchester estate is the ideal test environment." She shook her head, her mouth dry. "You're running an experiment?" "Not just one." He gestured to the screens. "Thousands. We feed the system a subject. The house adapts. It reads memory, fear, desire. Then it builds. Reconfigures. Mirrors are useful for that. They reflect not just the physical, but the mental. The emotional. We let the house construct your nightmare, and then we watch how you break." Emily's knees nearly gave out. "So, all of it. The doppelganger. The other versions of me, data. Generated simulations. Some real. Some pulled from other test runs. Something in between. Why me? He gave a half shrug. You're ideal. Isolated. Smart. Traumatized. People like you go missing all the time without anyone asking questions. You walked right into the trap yourself. Her thoughts reeled. She remembered the invitation from the Historical Society. The special tour. The email that had no reply address. It had all been a setup. The man turned back to the monitors. We learned early on that just letting subjects die was inefficient. Fear peaks, then drops. What's far more useful is despair. Prolonged hopelessness. The house is better at it than any of us. I'm not staying here, she said, voice shaking. He looked back. You already have. Suddenly, the room began to pulse. The lights flickered. The hum grew louder. The screens all went black. Then, one by one, they lit up again, but not with video feeds. Now they showed her. Emily. Standing exactly where she was. But each screen showed a different version. One crying. One screaming. One standing silently with blood on her hands. Another clawing at the walls, eyes wild. She turned in horror to look at the man, but he was gone. In his place stood a mirror. And in that mirror, she saw nothing. No reflection. Not even the room behind her. Just void. The hum rose into a deafening screech. The floor shook. The ceiling cracked. The mirror began to warp, its surface rippling like water again, but this time, she saw everything. Faces. Memories. Her childhood. Her fears. Her thoughts. Every terrible thing she'd ever done, said, thought. It poured out of her, sucked into the mirror like a vacuum. No, she whispered. No. The room exploded in noise. All the monitors shattered at once. Lights burst from the ceiling. Smoke poured from the walls. And then, from the mirror, it stepped out. It wasn't a double anymore. It was her, but stripped of everything human. Hollow eyes. Skin pale and stretched. A mouth sewn shut with black thread, but still twitching like it was trying to speak. She couldn't move. The thing lifted a hand and pointed at her. And then, for the first time, it spoke. Her voice. But not her tone. You fed it. We all did. And Emily understood. The house didn't just want fear. It wanted identity. Every person it trapped became part of it, piece by piece, emotion by emotion, until there was nothing left to take. No wonder the faces looked familiar. No wonder the voices all blurred. The house was its victims. And now it wanted her to join it. Something in her snapped. She screamed, not in terror this time, but in rage. She grabbed a broken shard from the shattered monitors and lunged at the mirror being, driving the jagged glass into its chest. It didn't bleed. It didn't die. It simply absorbed the shard, pulling it into its body. Then it staggered. Twitched. Glitched. She remembered what the man said, the house adapts. So what happens when it's fed a contradiction? Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out the only item she'd kept since the beginning, a photograph of her mother. The last thing that had grounded her. She held it out. This is me, she whispered. This is who I am. Not what you made me. The thing convulsed violently. The walls around them cracked open. Screams poured in from every direction, but they weren't hers. They weren't anyone's. They were the house's. The pain of being denied. The ground split open beneath her. She fell. Fell through light. Through memory. Through every version of herself that had ever been trapped. Until, darkness. Silence. And then, a voice. A child's. "Mommy?" Emily's eyes opened. She was standing in her childhood bedroom. Sunlight pouring through the windows. Birds chirping outside. No broken mirrors. No endless hallways. No screaming walls. Just peace. A dream? She turned and saw the photo of her mother on the dresser. Same frame. Same image. She stepped toward the window, blinking back tears. And then, just before she looked out, she saw it. In the reflection. Her mirror didn't show the room. It showed the house. The real house. Dark. Waiting. Alive. And it was watching her back. If you made it this far, what do you think just happened? Was Emily saved, or is this just another layer of the trap? Would you have fought back, or just tried to escape? Let me know in the comments. And whatever you do, don't trust your reflection.